Imagine being so hungry that you eat food which could actually make you sick or worse, not because you wanted to, but because you had no other choice. In the harsh streets of old Britain during war, poverty, and economic collapse, people didn't just struggle to eat. They risked their lives every single meal, from toxic ingredients to rotten scraps, to desperate inventions that pushed the limits of survival. These are 30 forgotten British meals that were not just poor, but dangerous to eat, and trust me. Some of these will shock you. 1. Stinking Bishop cheese. Now today, this cheese is considered a delicacy, but back then, it was often eaten in contaminated conditions. Poor families couldn't store food properly. No refrigeration, no hygiene. So when cheese went bad, they still ate it, because wasting food was not an option. The risk? Severe food poisoning, but hunger doesn't wait for safety. 2. Dripping sandwiches. This was one of the most common poor meals. Bread with beef fat drippings. But here's the catch, that fat was often reused. Again, and again, and again. Stored in unhygienic containers. Exposed to flies, dirt, and bacteria. Still, it was high in calories. And when you're starving, calories matter more than cleanliness. 3. Peas pudding gone sour. Made from boiled split peas, this dish was a staple. But poor families stretched food for days, sometimes weeks, and when it went sour, they didn't throw it away, they ate it anyway. The fermentation could turn dangerous, especially in warm conditions. But again, it was eat or go hungry. 4. Mock goose. No goose. No meat. Just mashed potatoes, onions, and sage. Shaped and cooked to resemble meat. But here's where it gets risky. Ingredients were often already on the edge of spoiling. Old potatoes. Rotten onions. The illusion of a proper meal, hiding the reality of decay. 5. Bread and milk. Sounds harmless. Bread soaked in milk. But milk, back then, was often unpasteurized. Meaning, it could carry diseases like tuberculosis or bacterial infections. And bread? Sometimes moldy. 6. Nettle soup. Yes, people ate stinging nettles, boiled into soup. But if not prepared properly, they could cause skin irritation or digestive issues. 7. Fish head stew. The poor couldn't afford full fish, so they bought heads, bones, and scraps, boiled into a stew. But fish spoils quickly, and without proper storage, it became a breeding ground for bacteria. 8. Workhouse gruel. This was a watery mix of oats and water. It was often undercooked, contaminated, and nutritionally empty. And this is just the beginning. Meals made from rotting meat, toxic ingredients. How did people survive this at all? 9. Scrap pie. A pie made from whatever scraps were available. Leftover meat, sometimes unidentified. Organs, fat. 10. Blood pudding. Nutritious in theory, but blood spoils extremely fast. Without proper handling, it could carry harmful bacteria. 11. Boiled sheep's head. Yes, the entire head. Boiled and eaten. Brains, eyes, tongue. Nothing wasted. 12. Potato peel stew. Not potatoes, just the peels. Boiled into a thin stew, but peels often carried dirt and bacteria. The reality of poverty wasn't just hunger, it was risking your life just to eat. In part 2, things get even darker. We're entering a level of desperation where the line between food and danger completely disappeared, because these next meals weren't just risky. Some of them should have never been eaten at all. 13. Rotten meat stew. Meat was expensive, so when poor families got it, they made it last, even when it started to rot. The smell? Covered with strong herbs, onions, or heavy boiling. The idea was simple. If you cook it enough, it becomes safe, but that wasn't always true. Rotten meat can carry harmful bacteria that don't disappear with cooking. Still, they ate it, because throwing it away meant wasting something rare. 14. Street sweep soup. In crowded cities like London, street vendors dropped food, markets left scraps, and poor children collected them. Vegetable peels, bits of meat, bread pieces swept from the ground. washed quickly, and turned into soup. The danger? Dirt, animal waste, unknown contamination. It wasn't just unhygienic. It was unpredictable. 15. Sawdust bread. During extreme shortages, flour was mixed with sawdust or fillers. Yes, wood particles. It made bread heavier, more filling, but completely unsafe. It could cause digestive damage, malnutrition, internal irritation, but to the starving, a full stomach mattered more than the consequences. 16. Diseased animal meat. When animals died from illness, wealthy people discarded them. The poor? They took what they could get. Dead livestock, sometimes already decomposing, was cut, cooked, and eaten. The risks were obvious, but hunger doesn't calculate risk. It reacts to survival. 17. Spoiled shellfish. Shellfish was cheap near coastal areas, but also extremely dangerous if not fresh. Without refrigeration, it spoiled fast. And spoiled shellfish can cause severe poisoning. Still, it was widely eaten by the poor because it was accessible and sometimes the only option. 18. Bone broth from old carcasses. Bones were collected, sometimes from trash, sometimes from butchers, boiled for hours to extract nutrients. But many of these bones were already old, left out, exposed, contaminated. The broth looked nourishing, but what it carried inside wasn't always safe. 19. Workhouse bread. In workhouses, bread was stretched to feed as many as possible, made from low-grade flour, sometimes mixed with chalk or fillers. Why? To make it last longer. But consuming this regularly could lead to nutritional deficiencies, digestive issues. It filled the stomach, but weakened the body. 20. Watered-down milk. Milk sellers often diluted milk with water, but not clean water, contaminated water, sometimes even taken from polluted sources. This turned a basic drink into a health hazard, especially for children, yet people bought it because it was cheaper. At this point, you might be thinking, this is already extreme, but what if I told you it gets worse? Because the next set of meals weren't just about eating unsafe food, they were about eating things never meant for humans at all. 21. Foraged mushrooms. When food ran out, people turned to forests. Mushrooms became a free food source. But here's the problem. Not all mushrooms are safe, and many look almost identical. One wrong choice could lead to serious illness or worse, and yet people still took that risk because hunger doesn't wait for certainty. 22. Burnt bread scraps. Bakeries threw away burnt or stale bread. The poor collected it, scraped off the worst parts, soaked it, softened it, ate it. But burnt food in large amounts isn't healthy, and stale bread often carried mold. Still, it was better than nothing. 23. Awful overload. Organs like liver, kidneys, and lungs were cheap, so the poor relied heavily on them. But eating large quantities, especially when not fresh, could lead to health issues, yet it was one of the few consistent protein sources. 24. Fake tea. Tea was expensive, so people created substitutes. Boiled leaves, herbs, or random plants. But not all plants are safe. Some could cause nausea, toxic reactions. Still, it gave the illusion of comfort. A warm drink in hard times. This wasn't just poverty. This was survival at the edge of danger. Every meal, a question mark. Every bite, a risk. By now, you've seen how poverty forced people to eat spoiled food, scraps, and even dangerous substitutes. But this part? This is where things stop feeling like meals and start feeling like last resorts. Because during war, famine, and total desperation, people didn't just eat what was unsafe. They ate what was never meant to be food in the first place. Wartime, mock everything when reality was replaced by illusion. During World War periods, food shortages became extreme. So people invented mock versions of everything: eggs, cream, meat, made from powdered substitutes, chemicals, and whatever fillers were available. The problem? Nobody really knew what long-term effects these had. They weren't tested or regulated. They were created out of urgency and consumed out of necessity. Potato bread with rotten fillers. Potatoes were a staple, but when supplies ran low, even potatoes weren't fresh. Rotten parts were cut off and the rest was mashed into bread. But rot spreads deeper than what you can see. Still, people convinced themselves, this part looks fine, because they needed it to be fine. Boiled grass and weeds, when nothing else was available. People turned to the ground beneath their feet, grass, random weeds, unknown plants. Boiled into soups, some had mild value. Others weren't meant for human digestion at all. The danger was slow weakness. Animal feed turned human food. Grain meant for animals was sometimes repurposed for people. But animal feed can contain contaminants, dust, and harmful additives. Still, when flour ran out, this became the substitute, moldy jam and preserves. Sugar was precious, so when jam went bad, it wasn't thrown away. Mold on top? Scraped off. The rest was eaten, but mold isn't always surface level. Still, sweetness was rare, and people held on to it. No matter what, tea made from burnt bread. When fake tea ingredients ran out, burnt bread soaked in hot water gave a dark color and bitter taste. Nutritionally, nothing, but it gave warmth, and sometimes that feeling was enough to keep going. At this point, food wasn't about taste. It was about convincing yourself that what you're eating will keep you alive. Boiled leather, yes leather, old shoes, belts, scraps. Boiled for hours to soften them. It didn't taste like food. But in extreme famine, it became something to chew, something to fill the stomach. Burnt flour paste, flour, when available, was stretched to its limit, burnt, mixed with water, turned into a thick paste. Imagine living like this where every meal is uncertain, where survival depends on choices you never thought you'd make. And yet people endured. Imagine reaching a point where food is no longer about taste, not even about survival in the way we understand it, but about tricking your body just enough to make it through one more day. No choices, no safety, no certainty. Just one question: can I eat this and live? Because for thousands of people in Britain's harshest years of poverty, that wasn't a dramatic thought. It was a daily reality. And what you're about to see in this final part is where the line between food and desperation completely disappears. 27. Boiled leather, when objects became meals. We mentioned this before, but now understand it fully. This wasn't a one-time act of desperation. People returned to it again and again. Old boots, worn-out belts, scraps of hardened leather. Items that had already lived their purpose. Boiled for hours, sometimes overnight, until they softened just enough to chew. Now think about that. This isn't food. There are no nutrients worth mentioning, just a tough, rubbery texture and the faint illusion that you're eating something. But here's the psychological part most people miss. When hunger stretches over days, your body doesn't just crave nutrition. It craves the act of eating, the movement of chewing, and boiled leather quieted the body. It distracted the mind, even if only for a short time, and sometimes that was enough. 28. 8. Burnt grain mash. Grain was precious, but it wasn't always protected. Storage conditions were poor. Moisture seeped in, and sometimes grain burned during processing. Today, we'd throw it away. Back then, that wasn't an option. Burnt grain was crushed, mixed with water, and turned into a dark, bitter mash. It didn't taste right, but it filled the stomach. But here's the risk: burnt or spoiled grain can carry harmful compounds. Not something you notice immediately, but your body pays for it. 29. Reused and contaminated cooking fat. In fact, it made food look better. Fat dripping, grease was reused constantly. Collected from cooking, used again and again for weeks. Every time it was reheated, it broke down and became toxic. But to someone in poverty, fat meant energy and flavor. The difference between food and nothing at all. 30. Absolute scrap meals. Vegetable peels, stale bread, discarded bits. Everything went into one pot. No recipe, no guarantees, just boiling. Softening everything into something that could be swallowed. it was a gamble, because there was no way to know what you were really eating. These weren't created out of curiosity, but extreme pressure. Wages were too low, food access was limited. So people adapted, not perfectly, but effectively enough to stay alive. Every meal came with a question, is this safe? And the answer was often, probably not, but starving wasn't an option. Hunger changes how you think. It lowers your caution. It makes dangerous things seem acceptable. Your brain shifts to survival. This isn't just history, it's a reminder. Comfort is temporary. Systems can fail, and when they do, humans adapt. After hearing all this, food starts to look different. It's no longer just taste or preference, it's security and stability. When you put all 30 meals together, you see resilience, the kind that exists in quiet, repeated decisions to keep going. These weren't just meals. They were proof that, when pushed to the edge, humans don't give up. They endure. If this changed the way you see survival, stay connected. Because there are more stories of what people did to stay alive